low-hanging fruit. All right. Where is everybody? Oh, all right.
Buying books online.
Yeah, that's what they should be doing.
2023. And then whichever one you want. Torah Study, Provide, and some others. They have a number of different ones. And when you click on that, you come up with some real beauties. About 4 or 5 different.
Okay. And that's how that was your base.
Yeah, and then they start Bereshit and then tell the readings. But the best part is they give you the spiel. Thank you. And then you take up the notes. And then there's artificial intelligence.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
This is good.
Tough day, tough week, but should never halt our study of Torah. In fact, even more so, should encourage us to study even more. So, with all that's going on in the world, I'm glad that you were able to brave it's drizzling. It's drizzling out, so that you were able to fight through the drizzle with such courage to be here this morning, when so many others were deterred by the drizzle. You deserve a real. Okay, here we go. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asor et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asor et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Beini uven v'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asof et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim v'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael ha-Shabbat la'asor et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi shavat vaynafash, shavat vaynafash, shavat vaynafash v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asor et ha-Shabbat le'dorotam berit olam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. Okay. And the blessing for a study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, good Shabbos, everyone. Our study should be On behalf of the memory of all those who've fallen, all those who are injured, and all those who have been kidnapped, just as our prayers are with them, the mitzvah of our Torah study should be for their benefit. We begin again the Torah. Does everyone have a sheet? There should be plenty. I thought it would be super crowded, so I made a lot. But I could not have anticipated the drizzle. It's supposed to rain next week. Torah portion is Noah. All right.
Better get used to it.
I'll be here all week. It should rain. Okay. So here we go. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We're beginning again the Torah, and as you know how we do Torah study at Beth Am, we go according to the triennial cycle. So we just completed last year the third triennial cycle, so now we go back to triennial cycle 1. If you need the verses for every Torah portion, you can always go to our website, tbam.org, type in Torah Study, and all of the Torah portions for the year are there with the verses that we'll be using. But it's easy now because we're in the first triennial cycle. We're always doing the first third of every portion. Now, the Torah begins with the story of creation, obviously. And the rabbis ask, why? Because the Torah is supposed to be a book about teaching us how to be Jews. And so Rashi asks the very famous question, why don't you start with Rosh Chodesh? Why don't you start with Rosh Hashanah? Why don't you tell us what to do and how to be Jews? And later on, you'll tell us about the stories of creation. We don't need to know that right now. We need to know the mitzvahs. What are we supposed to do? And so, I don't know why it's such a hard question that the rabbis had to answer. I don't know why creation is not, like a logical starting point. Why not? It's the beginning. Why not start at the beginning? But okay, so there's the question that they ask. And Rashi brings two answers. Now, I just want to remind you that whenever you read Rashi, it's not Rashi's opinion. Rashi doesn't have any opinions. Well, Rashi has lots of opinions. His opinions are what he chooses to put in his commentary. But what he puts in his commentary are not his own words. They're cut and pasted from the rabbis. So every time you're reading Rashi, it's literally just cut and pasted from the Midrash or the Talmud. Every single time. With the exception of maybe 4 times in the Torah, Rashi says, here's what I think. But every other time it's just cut. Now, where do you get Rashi's opinion? Well, if there's 8 Midrashim on one verse, and the rabbis have different opinions about, one rabbi says this, and Rashi picks one. And he says, well, I go with this guy. So that's his opinion. But it's cut and pasted. So what I want to look at today is 2 Midrashim that Rashi chose as to why God started the world with creation. So let me just read, Norman, I just want to focus today on the first 5 verses. The first 5 verses of the Torah, which volumes have been written about the first 5 verses of the Torah. You could write a book about the first verse of the Torah. So don't think that you're not getting your money's worth. There's a lot of good stuff here. Okay, so let's look, Norman, at the first day of creation, the first 5 verses. With the mic, please.
When God was about to create heaven and earth, the earth was a chaos, unformed, and on the chaotic water's face there was darkness. Then God's Spirit glided over the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And when God saw how good the light was, God divided the light from the darkness. God then called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day.
Okay. Sound familiar? You've heard this before? Okay. Now, again, Rashi chose a couple of different midrashim to ask the question, why did God start the Torah with creation? Now, the first one, if you've never heard it before, is going to feel particularly relevant for you this morning. Okay? I just want to warn you. This is amazing stuff. Now, before we get into it, when was Rashi living? Anybody know?
11th century France.
Right. I think he died in 1105. Right. 1105. So he was born, I don't know, 1030, 10 something like that. So 11th century France, or what we would call France today. He lived in two different cities for most of his life. One was, I guess some might be part of Germany today. I think it was Mainz. And then he lived in Troyes. Troyes, Troyes, which is about an hour and a half south of Paris. And today, where he lived, there's like a statue. So you can go there, and it's like a big circular thing. So if you are one of the most important rabbis in the history of the world, you can get like a statue. So that's pretty good. Listen, when we went to the village council and we asked them to name the road here after Rabbi Baumgard. And they said, we can do it up to a point. I said, well, leave me like a little bit. Leave me like, like one house. Like one house. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Good thing you have a short day.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. Let's take a look. Edith, would you mind reading the first Rashi? Now, this is going to hit home pretty hard, I would think.
In the beginning, Rabbi Isaac said, the Torah, which is the law book of Israel, should have commenced with the verse Exodus 12:2. This month shall be unto you the first of the month, which is the first commandment given to Israel.
Right. So you see what Rashi says there? Rashi says, tell us about the mitzvahs. Well, first of all, he's not saying this is what I think. He's saying there was one of the rabbis from the Talmud, Rabbi Isaac, who said, tell us about the mitzvahs. Tell us about how we're supposed to do Rosh Hashanah. Tell us about how we're supposed to do Rosh Chodesh. What do we do on day one? So that's how it should have been. So then he's going to say, well, what's the reason that it starts with creation? Okay, here we go.
What is the reason then that it commences with the account of the creation? Because of the thought expressed in the text, Psalms 111-6, he declared to his people the strength of his works. That is, he gave an account of the work of creation, in order that he might give them the heritage of the nations.
Okay, so what does that mean? He showed the world at the beginning of the Torah that God created the world, and the world belongs to him. So, if he's going to give the heritage of the nations, what does that mean? It just means, here's all I'm saying so far, if God created the world and the world belongs to God, he can do with it what he wants. Clear so far? Okay, let's keep going.
For should the peoples of the world say to Israel, you are robbers because you took by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan.
Right, so if I was there, I would have said to Rashi, you think? Are you crazy? You don't know anything about the future. You think someone's ever going to say that the Jews stole the land of Israel? Are you nuts? Where do you come up with this stuff? Who would ever say that? Rashi said it 1,000 years ago. Okay, here we go.
Israel may reply to them, all the earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be he. He created it and gave it to whom he pleased. When he willed, he gave it to them, and when he willed, he took it from them and gave it to us.
Okay, so you're familiar with the verse, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete? So when Abraham is going to go to Israel, God says, I can't give you the land. You can't have the land because there's people who are living there. And so long as they're living there and they don't sin and deserve to be kicked out, then they can stay there. But eventually, the iniquity of the Amorites just refers to the Canaanites, to all the people who are living there, eventually they'll hit their threshold and I will kick them out and they'll leave and then I'll give the land to you. But then God said to the Jews, same deal. If you sin, you're going to get kicked out too. And what happened? They worshiped idols and they got kicked out and they ended up in Babylonia. So then they repented, they came back 70 years later, and God said, same deal. And we fought with each other, sinat chinam, and our sins reached a threshold, and God kicked us out too. That's why we're not there right now. I mean, some of us are. We've come back, but for the last 2,000 years, we've been kicked out. Now, why didn't we go back over the last 2,000 years? If you came to my lunch and learn, you would know. I can't do every class and every... No, but the point of the Torah is that the land is holy and it can only stand so much sinning before it spits you out. And so the nations who were there got kicked out because of their sins, and the Jews came and moved in. Now, Rashi knew that someday people might say, this isn't your land. And so he says, well, what determines if it's our land or not? And Rashi's answer is, it's God's decision. Well, why does God get to decide? Because it's his. He owns it. He owns it. And so that's it. So that's the first midrash. Let's look at the second one, and then I'll explain something I think you'll think is amazing. Okay. Yeah. Jeff, would you mind reading the second one? The second Rashi there? In the beginning, God created? We should have extra paper. Do you not have a paper?
No, that's fine.
Do we have any more? There should be tons of them.
In the beginning, God created. Yeah. This verse calls aloud for explanation in the manner that our rabbis explained it. God created the world for the sake of the Torah, which is called the beginning, Reshit, of God's way, and for the sake of Israel, who are called the beginning, Reshit, of God's increase. Okay,
now, maybe we wouldn't teach this in too many places. If you read the full Rashi there, and I only brought you a part of it, but you should have enough there to understand the point that I'm about to make. The Torah starts Bereshit. Now, in Hebrew, we put the prepositions before the word, before a noun, and connect it to the word. So Bereshit is all one word in Hebrew, but ba means in. Now, ba, with what's called a shva, the two dots, one on top of the other, if you have that vowel underneath the ba, it means in a. If it's ba, with like the little t underneath, which is called a kamatz, that means in the. So ba is in a, ba is in the. It's the same thing for any preposition that you put before. Like if you say le or la, whatever. So notice it's not in the beginning. It's bereshit. It's in a beginning. Might there have been other creation stories that came before this one, where there were dinosaurs or things that are older than our world or who knows what? Yeah. This is our beginning for what we're living in. Could there have been stuff before that? Yes. That's why the Torah begins with a bet and not an aleph. We don't ask about aleph. We don't understand aleph. And if you think about how the letter bet is, you can't go back. There's a line there. You can't go through it. You can only go forward. You can't go backward to see what happened before creation. So, ba means in. Reshit is the same word as Rosh, right? Rosh Hashanah. Rosh meaning head or the beginning, right? Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, or new year, beginning of the year. Reshit, from the same word, beginning. You see how Rosh, Resh, Reshit. Now, what Rashi's saying is, if you look at other places in the Bible, other places in the Tanakh, Reshit refers to God's first ones, which is a synonym for the people of Israel. So, if you look at what Rashi's saying here is, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But in a beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But if you translate Bereshit not as in a beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, ba means in. But in other places in the Bible, lots of other places, ba can also mean for, F-O-R. Sometimes the prepositions can mean a couple different things. Modern Hebrew too. Ba, for Reshit, for the people of Israel. So now what Rashi's telling you is Bereshit is code for, not in a beginning, but for the people of Israel. And now what the beginning of the Torah is telling you is, why was the world created? Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. For the people of Israel, God created the world. That's the real meaning of the verse. It's powerful, right? That's this world. Yeah. Well, and the next world, because he took the light and put it for us. So maybe not what came before, who cares? The dinosaurs can have it. But this world is created for us. Now, you ask the question, why are there non-Jews? Because without them, who would hate us? You know, I mean, there's only so much enmity the lions and tigers had for us. So they need, no. I don't know. So it's a good question. Why are there other planets? Who needs them? I mean, there are reasons. I don't necessarily understand them, but there are reasons. Okay. Now, Rashi says two things. One is, he points out that the whole world's created for the Jewish people. And two, he points out that someday people are going to say to the Jews, you stole the land. Now, we have to put this in the proper milieu. Rashi, we pointed out, lived 1,000 years ago in France. What was going on in his life? Rashi's talking about that the land belongs to the Jews. Where are the Jews in Rashi's day? Rashi was never in Israel.
In the diaspora.
In Europe, mainly. What's happening in Europe at the end of Rashi? The Crusades. And how's that going for the Jews?
Poorly.
But even more so, at the end of Rashi's life, the Crusades were starting at the end of Rashi's life. So his last 7 or 8 years. But here Rashi's saying the world's created by God, the land belongs to the Jews. The Jews are thoroughly defenseless during his life. And the Muslims and the Christians are fighting over the land that he's telling them that's our land. It's a very interesting way of looking at things. Dave?
So the Jews were never meant to be the only people in the world.
Obviously, right, of course.
That what Rashi is trying to tell us is that for Jews, this is your story. This is your beginning. This is why God wanted Judaism, or wants Judaism. And then if that's what God wants, and you're his people, this is how you're going to live. So it's not really a message to the world, it's a message to Jews.
Yeah.
It's a message to the world about Jews.
Yes. Alfred and then Bill.
Coincidentally, October 14th is the anniversary of the Battle of Hastings in 1066, the Norman invasion of England.
Alfred, you're just telling us stuff that we all know. I mean, who doesn't know that?
Rashi would have been 20 years old, so that would have been in his immediate perception of world history.
I don't know much about it, but that, I don't know about that battle, but that's interesting. Very interesting. I don't know how you know all this stuff.
I get a little confused on the ownership of the land. In we're told that the land does not belong to anybody. The land belongs to God.
Yes.
And we are just tenants.
Yes.
But this doesn't say that. This
Okay, so what does this say? This says that the land belongs to God, and God chooses who lives there. Now, he prefers that we would live there. It was meant for us. However, twice we blew it. And it took 2,000 years of suffering before the seeds of the redemption were planted again. So.
Maybe there is a message for the rest of the world.
Oh, can you use the mic, please? I get a lot of complaints about that. There you go.
Maybe there is a message for the rest of the world in, for the Israelites, I'm creating this world. And so we are tenants on, the land is ours, we are tenants on that land, it belongs to us. God intended that to the Jews. So if you're not Jewish and the land is that important to you, maybe you need to look deep inside and maybe you need to switch teams.
Yeah. It's one way of looking
Messaging
at it.
goes both ways.
It's one way of looking at it. Okay. To me, one of the most reassuring verses in the Torah is Deuteronomy 7, verse 7, which is not because you're the mightiest of nations or largest of nations did I choose you, for you are the smallest of people. If you ever watch these TikToks where they ask morons, on the street, how many Jews are in the world, there's some guy walking in Times Square or something. So how many Jews are there in the world, do you think? A billion. If there were a billion Jews in the world, we would control the whole world. But there's like 12 of us, and we're still holding our own. It's hard to say exactly, but somewhere between 14 and 17 million Jews. That's nothing. There's, more people live in Florida than there are Jews in the whole world. So, we weren't meant to be a big people. One of the things about it is, if you think about it, as an eternal people, so few of the world, for us it's all we know, but so few of the world are Jewish. So few get to be part of this. Now, they would tell you, I don't miss, the slaughters and the gas chamber. That part of it I'm good with not being Jewish. But the whole essence of really knowing God and the Torah and the mitzvahs and, knowing that we're eternal and that we'll be here forever and that we've been here since the beginning, very few people get to be part of that or really even understand it. It's a very, very special thing to be Jewish. I'll just tell you, there's one story. I have a lot to get to, so I don't want to. But there's a story from the Holocaust about this guy who, at one point, I forget if it was in a camp or a ghetto, but they hung a few Jews and they made the rest of the Jews come and watch as the Jews were murdered. And then the Nazis threw the bodies to the side. And one Jew went over to the dead bodies and started saying Kaddish. And another Jew came over to him and said, "What are you doing? Why you waste your breath? What God are you praying to? Are you nuts? Well, what is there to pray at a moment like this? Who do you believe in?" And the guy said, he pointed towards where the Nazis were, and he said, "I'm thanking God that he didn't make me like them." It's times like this, after what happened, I'm even more proud to be Jewish. Very few people understand that. Very few people understand. Now, there's a way of understanding the first line in the Torah in a Hasidic framework that I think is very helpful to us. And so I want to focus, now that we've looked at the first 5 verses, I want to just look at the first verse. Actually, sorry, I want to look at the second verse. So, and for a moment, I just want to dissect with you the Hebrew terminology here. Some of it maybe you've heard before, some of it maybe you haven't. So if you're looking at verse 2, v'ha'aretz. The means and ha means the. And the ha'aretz. You know what ha'aretz is? Land, right? Eretz Yisrael. And the land, haita. Haita means was. Now listen closely. There's two words that can't be translated into any language. Tohu vavohu. Have you ever heard that before? Okay. And the land was tohu vavohu. Now, what does that mean? My translation says bewilderment and void. But I mean, nobody really knows what this means. All we can say is whatever the world was before God started molding it or creating and separating and doing. Now, as Jews, we believe the world was created ex nihilo, right? Meaning there was nothing. God created the world out of nothing. There was nothing. But then God created stuff, whatever, tohu vavohu, a mishmash. And then he started, by the way, God created by word. God said, let there be light, and there was light. He didn't like make the light. He wasn't, like Edison. He wasn't like pulling wires and trying to figure, how do I get electricity to work? That's not what God was doing. He just said, let there be light, and there was light. He just said it. So to create, the second word in the Torah is bara, right? Bereshit bara. Bara means create. Daber, you know the word daber? Vaydaber Moshe spoke. Daber. Bra, so bara and dabra are the roots. Abra, cadabra. I will create it like I spoke it. That's what abracadabra means. Abra is bara, cadabra is daber. Abracadabra, it's Hebrew. It's actually Aramaic. That's why the aleph at the beginning. That's where the ah comes from. It's Aramaic. But that's where it comes from. God spoke it, and it was. Okay. Now, so, v'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, and the world was unformed and void. V'choshech. What's choshech? Darkness. There was darkness. Al pnei tahom. All over the world. V'ruach Elokim. And the Spirit of God, merachefet al pnei hamayim. And God's Spirit was hovering over this darkness. Verse 3, Vayomer Elokim, and God said, Yihi ur vayihi ur. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now, if we take these two verses and look at them through a Hasidic lens, something very interesting will come about. Now, the Hasidic masters of the 1700s and 1800s, they didn't just make stuff up. You have to prove it. So I want to give you a little bit of proof, or a little bit of background on what tohu vavohu is. And once you can do that, then you'll be able to understand how the Hasidic masters interpreted verses 2 and verse 3. Now, if I wanted tohu vavohu, a good translation will translate tohu vavohu into tohu vavohu. It's whatever it is. But if I wanted to learn more about those words, where could I go? Where's Ed? Whenever Ed's not here. Whenever I ask this question, Ed always has the answer. Other places in the Tanakh. So what I could do is I could look at other places throughout the Bible, Tanakh. You know what I mean when I say Tanakh, right? The prophets and the writings. The Hebrew Bible. When I say Bible, I mean the Hebrew Bible, which in Hebrew we pronounce Tanakh. I can look at other places in the Tanakh, and then from the context there, I could maybe extract some more information. So, if you look, I brought you a few. Isaiah 34, verses 10 and 11. So it says here, let's see, who has a mic? Anyone? Would you mind reading? Roberta?
Night and day it shall never go out. Its smoke shall rise for all time. Through the ages it shall lie in ruins. Through the eons none shall traverse it. Jackdaws and owls shall possess it. Great owls and ravens shall dwell there. God shall measure it with a line of chaos and with weights of emptiness.
Okay, so Isaiah is predicting the destruction of the first temple. He's talking about a time when darkness and evil has overcome and destroyed the Jewish people. Now, by the way, just because God allowed the Jews to be destroyed in the first temple and the second temple because of the sins of the Jewish people doesn't mean that the Babylonians and the Romans weren't the bad guys. They still shouldn't have done it. It's just what happened was, normally, if someone had come to attack the Jews, God would have protected them. A miracle, something good would have happened, like in the Hanukkah story. But because their sins were so great, their force field of God's protection was down. And the Babylonians and the Romans were able to get through. But it doesn't mean the Babylonians and the Romans weren't very evil for doing this. You still shouldn't go and burn someone's holy temple and enslave their whole population just because you can. Right? They're still the bad guys. So Isaiah is seeing the suffering of the Jewish people, or predicting the suffering of the Jewish people, and he's saying, what will it look like when the temple is destroyed? Now, notice very carefully his words. Night and day it shall never go out. So what does that remind us of? Well, I'm going back a little earlier. The beginning of creation, before God created light. Before God created light, it was always dark. Look at verse 2 again. V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu. The world was full of chaos. And what was there? V'choshech apnei tahom. And there was darkness all over the place because light didn't exist yet. So what Isaiah is saying is the destruction of the first temple is like the undoing of creation and bringing darkness all over the world. Certainly, at the time of Isaiah, the sun still went up and went down. It wasn't any darker than any other time. But the terminology that he's using is saying when the first temple will be destroyed, it will be as if creation is being undone and we're going back to a time of total darkness. Yeah, Erica? Do you have a microphone?
But could it be that this concept of tohu vavohu is not only this physical disorder, but also the lack of principles, the lack of values, and therefore there's no light because there's no derech, there's no way to see through where you are going.
Right, for sure. So if you look, what does any of this have to do with tohu vavohu? I mean, we've already explained it, but you see where it says at the end, line of chaos and weights of emptiness. That's where he says, I should have brought the Hebrew, but that's where he uses the word tohu. He uses that word, tohu. You hardly ever see that anywhere else in the Torah, or in the Tanakh. But you see it here where Isaiah is referring to when it gets dark again. And when does it get dark again? When the Jews are destroyed. And when are the Jews destroyed? When a really bad enemy comes to attack us. All right? This is this week's Torah portion. With everything that's going on this week, this is this week's Torah portion.
Even if creation is undone and we go back to total darkness, God is still there. The Creator is still there.
Of course. But, if I sew you a shirt and you unsew it, I'm still here, but you've caused damage to the shirt. Right? I mean, I would never do that because I don't know how to sew. But you understand the idea. Okay, look what Ibn Ezra says. These words are similar in meaning to desolation. So he tells you, when you see that word tohu, originally tohu meant unformed and void, and God had to go and form the world. But once the world is formed, The only way that we're going to get back to unformed is if something really bad happens. And so Ibn Ezra says what that word means now is desolation. Because the only way to get back to tohu vavohu is for the Jewish people to be destroyed. Or at least, I mean, not destroyed completely, but sent into exile, have their temple destroyed, which is what happened. So tohu originally meant when the world is dark. Tohu vavohu meant when the world was dark. There was choshech al pnei tahom. There was darkness over the face of the earth. And God came and he brought light. Okay, now we have light. But what's light? Or. What's a synonym for or? You know what it says on, if I moved this thing, you know, they always bring this. I should tell them I don't write on Shabbat. The only time I write on Shabbat is to sign a book. It's only, in that case, I made a special, but if I would open up the curtain, you see the parochet, the curtains, it says on our thing, Torah ora. Ora, or, is a synonym for Torah. So there was darkness in the world, but then God put in light. Well, what was that light? That light was Torah, or the ideas of Torah. I mean, it couldn't have been light like we know. The sun, the moon, and the stars aren't created until day 4, but light comes in on day 1. Well, what's the light? The light is discernment, it's understanding, it's goodness, it's Torah. The real light, the sun, the moon, and the stars, aren't going to come for 3 more days. So now, when we say tohu, God takes the tohu and he puts Torah in there. But if the Jews stop, so that's how the world began. But now the world's beginning and things change. So now, as long as we're following Torah, the light's fine. But if we stop following Torah, we get destroyed. If we get destroyed, what do we get? We're back to tohu. So what is tohu in this mindset? Tohu is, as Ibn Ezra tells you, desolation. Why desolation? Because the enemy of the Jews have attacked and they've defeated us. Jeff?
So, one of the speakers on Wednesday night at the Holocaust Memorial, I don't remember which one, said that this wasn't about territorial disputes or religion or politics, what's going on. It was about light versus dark.
Jesus. Yeah, very nice. Okay. What?
Something happening?
Yeah, just people say some crazy things. Okay. Jeremiah is another example. Look at Jeremiah. Now, Jeremiah lived during the time of the destruction of the first temple. He saw it. And look what he says. I look at the earth, it is unformed and void. He actually says, Tohu vavohu. At the skies, and their light is gone. So, what's Jeremiah saying to us? He's saying that when bad things happen to the Jewish people, when the first temple was destroyed, which is what Jeremiah is talking about here, or when the second temple was destroyed, or the Crusades, or the Cossacks, or the Nazis, or Hamas, when bad things happen, we get tohu vavohu, we get darkness. Okay. Now, you have to understand the Hasidic masters reading this in the 17 and 1800s, they never heard of David Ben-Gurion. They never heard of Yitzhak Rabin. They never heard of Tel Aviv. Didn't exist. There was no, Herzl wasn't born yet. I mean, maybe by the end, but there was no Zionism. They lived in a world where when you went to a wedding, I'm doing a wedding tonight. It's really poignant. Because for most people, since 1948 at least, you smash the glass, especially since 1967, but you smash the glass at the end of the wedding, and you yell Mazel Tov, and that's it. But before 1967, when you smashed the glass, it's because you were dreaming that someday you could go back to the land of Israel. And that was a very poignant moment because you probably figured that in your lifetime that would never happen. I mean, maybe in the 60s, fine, but in the 1700s, what's it? The only way you're going to go back to Israel is if God's hand actually came and picked you up and the Messiah came. Otherwise, you're not going. So when you went to a wedding, there was always that bit of sadness. When you had your Passover Seder and you said, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, when we say that, we say, oh yeah, I'll be there in about 6 weeks. I have this meeting there. Or, yeah, I'm going, yeah, I'll be there. But imagine saying L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim in Rashi's day, when you never got to go to Israel and you never imagined you ever would unless some crazy miracle happened. So it meant an awful lot. And what Jeremiah is telling you here is, when the light is extinguished and we go back to what it was before God brought that light into the world, tohu vavohu, so listen very clearly. Before the world was created, tohu vavohu meant the world was unformed and void and there was no light, but who cares, because there were no Jews either. But now that the world has been created and that we know what light is, imagine going back to living in a world before there was any or. That's what it's like. And it's, so for these rabbis to say tohu vavohu, it's a horrible thing. Okay. I'm going to skip over this midrash for now. I don't know if it's even that helpful. It's just kind of interesting. You can, let's just take a quick look at it. Who's got it? Scott, would you mind reading? We'll just run through it real quickly because I want to get to the grand finale here because it's really amazing.
Rabbi Abahu, that one?
Please, yeah.
Rabbi Abahu and Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon. Rabbi Abahu said, "This is analogous to a king who purchased 2 slaves for himself, both of them with 1 bill of sale and with 1 sum. He decreed for one of them that he should be supported from the royal treasury, and for the other he should have to toil to eat. That one sat bewildered and astonished. He said, 'Both of us were purchased with 1 bill of sale and 1 sum. Yet this one is supported from the royal treasury. And I, if I do not toil, I do not eat.' So too the earth sat bewildered and astonished. It said, 'The celestial beings and the terrestrial beings were created simultaneously. The celestial beings are sustained from the radiance of the divine presence. As for the terrestrial beings, if they do not toil, they do not eat.'"
Right. So God, there's the angels. They don't have to do the mitzvahs. They're just up there, and they're not able to sin. Angels can't sin. They can only do what God tells them. And so they're up there, and they get to live in heaven all the time, kind of for free. But we Jews, we've got to earn it. We've got to do the mitzvahs. We've got to not put cheese on our burgers. We've got, there's things we have to do. And it's hard. And there are people down here who are attacking us and trying to get us to go in the wrong directions and making our lives miserable and bringing tohu vavohu. So why do I bring it? If you look in the middle, he uses the term. He says, "That one sat bewildered and astonished." Now, what happens to us is, we Jews down here, sometimes we're tohu vavohu. And what that means is we've turned away from the or. Right? If you turn away from the or, then you get the choshech. If you turn away from the light, then you get the darkness. If you turn away from Torah, then you get tohu vavohu. Exactly. So that's what that midrash is coming to add. But I want to bring it home now in a way that I think is pretty powerful. If we go down to Ezekiel, Ezekiel 23:47. Ezekiel also living after the destruction of the first temple. "Let the assembly pelt them with stones and cut down with their swords. Let them kill their sons and daughters and burn down their homes. So Ezekiel's saying this is what will happen to the Jews when they're not following the Torah, that the enemies are going to come and throw stones at us and bring their swords. And he actually uses the word cheravot. Why is that an interesting word today? Cheravot. This is the word that Ezekiel uses to talk about what happens when it gets dark and our enemies attack us. The name of the operation, the name of the war on the Israeli side is called Charavot Barzel, swords of iron. Same word from this verse, Charavot Barzel. By the way, those names that Israel uses for its operations are picked at random by a computer. Nobody looks into the Torah and says, let's pick a word. They're picked at random by a computer program. And it shows this word, Charavot Barzel, which is the same word that Ezekiel uses when he's talking about Tohu Vavohu, which is this week's Torah portion. I'm sorry?
God picked the name of the operation. It's not random.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, 100%. So, look what Rashi says on that verse. This is the judgment of murderesses. The word uvare is an expression of cutting, and so you shall cut it down. Of the forest shall be yours, in the book of Joshua. Now, what Rashi's saying here is this is going down the rabbit hole, and then you're just sort of like, wow, this just gets crazier and crazier. The second word, remember, this week's Torah portion, which we also read this when last week on Simchat Torah, when the war started, we read this Torah portion too, because in Simchat Torah, you read the beginning of the Torah. So the second word of the Torah is bara. Bereshit bara. Bara means he created. In a beginning, Bereshit bara, he created. So bara, if you look in Ezekiel, he tells you that this word is also used to mean to cut down, as in the book of Joshua. Well, what's the book of Joshua? The book of Joshua comes right after the Torah ends, Moses dies, and the Jews enter into the land of Israel and take over the land of Israel. And there you see the word bara doesn't mean to create, it means to cut down, which means to say that the Jewish people, what the Bible is saying is, the Jewish people coming into the land of Israel is the continuation of God's design for creation. This is how it's supposed to be. Joshua was cutting down the people who were living there, the Canaanites, who it was time for them to leave because they'd reached the threshold of their sins. But what was really happening was bringing the Jewish people into the land of Israel was fulfilling the dream of creation, that the Jews are supposed to be there. That's how the Torah starts. This is my world, and I'm giving it to the Jews. That's bara. Again, that's the second word in the Torah. That's the word we read last week on the day the war started. And that's this week's Torah portion as the war begins, as the war is raging. Okay, now, if you look at Ibn Ezra on Genesis 1:1, a couple of sources up, this is not like the similar word beru in choose you a man for you, as in Samuel there, but rather like bareh, in and dispatch them. And again, he says, with their swords. Swords, cheravot. The meaning of bara is to cut or set a boundary. All right, now Ibn Ezra says this a lot. He says, the intelligent person will understand, which means, usually means you have to have a good sense of Kabbalah to understand what I'm talking about, but you don't need that because you have this class. So, not that I understand Kabbalah very well either, but okay. So what he's saying here is, what tohu vavohu has come to mean throughout time, throughout the rest of the Bible, is those times where our enemies attack us and make our lives dark. That's how the rabbis understand tohu vavohu. Now, so that's what I wanted to show you. Clear so far? Everyone understand? Any questions? Okay. Now that we understand that, I want to tell you about a teaching of Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who was one of the Hasidic masters. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav he died young. He was born in, I think, 1772, He died in 1810. If you've ever heard they say, Na, nach, nachman, nachman, meuman. Those are the Bratslaver Hasidim, who are always singing that in Israel, and they're very good at graffiti. So if you ever see like Na, nach, nachman, nachman, it's all over Israel. They love graffiti, and they think if you say that a lot, I guess he's going to come back or something. He's buried in Uman, which is in the Ukraine, and they go there on pilgrimage a lot to his grave. Very famous Hasidic teacher and founder of the Bratslaver movement, which is one of the most profound Hasidic dynasties. So this is his understanding of verse 2. And I want you to think about this, verse 2 and verse 3. As I tell you what Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav said in this verse, I want you to think about what's going on today. And hopefully it'll put it into context for you. Are you ready? Okay. Va'aretz hayta tohu vavohu. And the land was unformed and void, meaning bad people were coming to attack the Jews, and we were being defeated, right? Which is exactly what happened a week ago today. 1,300 Jews slaughtered. V'choshech al pnei tahom. And there was darkness everywhere. And our whole lives were darkened, and all we could see was darkness, and there's no way forward, and our lives have been altered forever, and so forth. V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim. But the Spirit of God was watching over and seeing what was happening to his people. What I'm adding now is what Rabbi Nachman said. Okay? And God was watching, and he saw what happened to his people. Vayomer Elohim. And the Jewish people cried out to God. Vayomer Elohim. And the Jewish people said, Elohim, God. Yehi or. We're praying for light at a time like this. Vayhi or. And there was light. You see that? One more time. There was tohu vavohu. Which we just pointed out, the rabbis say, and not even the rabbis, the prophets, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, we proved it. It means when we're being attacked and creation is undone, which for a few hours there, while all these horrible things were happening, creation was undone. We went back to what it was like, how people were behaving during the time of Noah. By the way, that's what the flood was. The flood was undoing creation. Because what was creation? Separating the waters. And then God said, well, I need to undo creation to destroy all these people, so I'm going to not separate the waters for a while and kill them all. And then I'll re-separate the waters. And that was the lawlessness that was in the world. Can you just skip with me to chapter 6, verse 11? Just want to take a look at Noah for 1 second. Chapter 6, verse 11. And before you look at it, don't look at it in Hebrew. Please don't look at it in Hebrew. But chapter 6, verse 11. Someone have it? Okay. So let me just explain this one more time. There's tohu vavohu. The world is unformed and void, which we've pointed out means that when our enemies attack us, they undo creation. They take us back to what it was during the time period when God had to kill everybody because of the flood. And things were that bad. And for a couple of hours there, that's what it was. And there was darkness everywhere over the void. And God was watching. And at that moment, the Jewish people cried out to God. And they said, please give us light. So what's light? We pointed out, light is Ur, It's Torah. It's what's Torah? Torah is what we can do to rearrange the tohu vavohu. You see what I'm saying? So there's tohu vavohu. Then God puts light into the world and the world is formed. But then our enemies come and they bring back the tohu vavohu. And we ask God for light. Because when the world was unformed and void and God needed to form it, he put his light in. But it's not light. There's no sun, moon, or stars. He put his discernment. He put Torah into the world. And that got rid of the tohu vavohu. Well, now, after the first temple is destroyed, after the second temple is destroyed, after the Holocaust, after what happened with Hamas, there's tohu vavohu again. So we need to ask God, give us Or, give us Torah. And we'll use that Torah. If we follow that Torah, we can get rid of the tohu vavohu again. Look at the end of chapter 6. I'm sorry, if you look at the end of verse 11, God tells us exactly why he had to destroy the world. And the earth had become corrupt before God, and the earth had become filled with robbery. Now, robbery is a bad translation. Robbery, a better translation I've seen is lawlessness. But what basically happened was, what caused God to bring the flood? What caused God to bring the flood? The people were so evil that they brought tohu vavohu again. What brings tohu vavohu? What's the last word in Hebrew of verse 11? Hamas. Hamas. Look at the word in Hebrew. Hamas. Hamas in our world is what brought tohu vavohu. The last word in verse 11 is Hamas. It refers to the word that caused God to bring the flood, to bring tohu vavohu, to undo creation. And when creation's undone, what we Jews do is we cry out to God, Vayomer Elohim. We say, Elohim, God. This is Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. Yehi Or. We need the Torah. Because if you give us Torah, if you remind us of Torah, and if we turn back to Torah and we start doing the mitzvahs again, we can get rid of the Hamas. We can get rid of the tohu vavohu. And what happens when we do that? Vayehi Or. There is light, and we destroy the Hamas that's trying to undo our creation. Okay. Shabbat shalom. Hamas, in modern Hebrew, is violence. In Arabic, it's zeal. But in Torah language, it's the word that means to undo creation. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, he has these parables that were taught down by word of mouth. So it's not, I looked in his commentary on the Torah, it's not there. I heard it from another rabbi who was teaching about Rabbi Nachman. So, but I can, I can send him credit or whatever and put it on the website. If you send me an email, I'll email it to you. If you remind me, because otherwise I'll forget. Okay, I'll do it. All right, sure.